You got what you wanted. The promotion, the salary, the apartment, the relationship, maybe even the body. And somewhere in the middle of achieving it, or the morning after you finally did, you felt it. Nothing. Not relief. Not joy. Just a kind of quiet flatness. And then, almost immediately, the mind started scanning for the next thing. If that has ever happened to you, you are not broken, you are not ungrateful, and you are not alone. Two of the greatest philosophical traditions in human history, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years, both looked directly at this experience and said the same thing. They knew exactly what was happening to you, and more importantly, they knew why. The Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome, the Buddhist philosophers of ancient India and China. Different cultures, different languages, different methods. But when it came to the human experience of working hard, achieving things, and still feeling empty, their diagnoses were not identical, but they converged in a striking place. And the word each tradition used to name that emptiness, it should stop you cold, because once you understand what they were actually describing, you will never look at your to-do list or your sense of self the same way again. The ancient Greeks had a word for the hunger that never feels finished: Pleonexia. It comes from pleon, meaning more, and achein, meaning to have. Literally, the desire to have more, always more. The Stoics would recognize it as a form of disordered desire, the mind reaching for externals as if they could complete the self. But this wasn't just about greed. It wasn't describing someone obviously shallow or materialistic. It was describing something far more subtle and far more dangerous. It was describing the person who genuinely believes that this next achievement will be the one that finally makes them feel whole. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, arguably the most powerful man alive in the 2nd century, kept a private journal, a notebook written to himself, never intended for publication. In it, he returned again and again to the same idea. The only power we truly possess is over our own mind, not over events, not over outcomes, over the way we meet them. He wasn't writing this as advice for others. He was writing it as a reminder to himself. Because even he, with absolute power, with armies, with the entire Roman Empire at his command, still caught himself chasing the feeling that something outside of him would finally be enough. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, who was born a slave, put it even more directly. Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. That sounds passive. It isn't. Epictetus was making a surgical distinction that most people spend their entire lives missing. The Stoics divided everything in life into two categories: things in our control, things not in our control. In our control, our judgments, our responses, our values, our attention, our character. Not in our control, outcomes, other people's opinions, promotions, results, recognition, everything that can be taken away. Here is the diagnosis. The emptiness you feel after achieving something is not a sign that you need to achieve more. It is a sign that you placed your sense of wholeness inside a category that could never hold it. You put your worth in the things not in your control. And the Stoics said, that is pleonexia at work, the endless craving for what external life can give you, which is, by definition, never enough, because it is never fully yours. Seneca, advisor to Emperor Nero, one of the wealthiest men of his era, and painfully aware of the irony, put it this way: it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. He had everything the world could offer, and he understood that the craving itself was the poverty, not the bank balance. The Stoic cure was not to stop working, stop achieving, or stop caring. It was to radically reorient where you place your sense of self, away from outcomes, toward the quality of your effort and character in each moment. They called this living according to virtue, arete, not perfection, but alignment. Doing the right thing in the right way for its own sake. When you act with virtue, with integrity, with presence, with genuine effort, that is already complete. The outcome doesn't need to validate it. But the ancient East arrived at the same diagnosis from a completely different direction. Buddhism opens with one of the most misunderstood sentences in all of world philosophy. Life is suffering. People hear that and think Buddhism is pessimistic. They think it's telling you to give up, expect nothing, be miserable. It is saying something far more precise. The original Pali word is dukkha, and it does not simply mean suffering the way we use the word in English. Teachers of Buddhism have long used this image to explain it. A wheel whose axle hole is slightly off-center. The wheel turns, but not smoothly. There is always a wobble, a subtle friction, an underlying offness. Dukkha is that sensation. Not always agony, often just a low hum of dissatisfaction beneath the surface of even a good life. The subtle sense that something is slightly not quite right, even when everything looks fine from the outside. The Buddha named this as the first noble truth, not to depress you, but because you cannot solve a problem you refuse to honestly name. Now here is where it connects directly to your emptiness after hard work. The Buddha's second noble truth identified the cause of dukkha. He called it tanha. Tanha is often translated as craving or thirst. But again, the translation misses something. The original image is of a person who is deeply thirsty and is given salt water. They drink. The thirst is briefly interrupted. And then it comes back worse than before, because salt water doesn't hydrate. It depletes. Tanha is craving for things that cannot, by their nature, quench you. Not because the things are bad, but because you are trying to use them to fill something they were never designed to fill. The promotion, the approval, the number in the bank account, the validation on social media. They are all salt water. They interrupt the thirst for a moment, and then it comes back. The Buddha went further. He said tanha operates in three modes. Kama tanha, craving for sensory pleasure, for things that feel good. Bhava tanha, craving for becoming, for being someone, for achievement and identity. Vibhava tanha, craving for non-becoming, for annihilation of the self or escape from existence altogether. Look at the second one closely. Bhava tanha, the craving to become. This is the engine underneath most ambition. Not just wanting money or success, but wanting to become the kind of person who has those things, wanting the identity, the self-image, the story of yourself. And the Buddhist diagnosis is brutal in its honesty. As long as your peace is conditional on becoming a certain version of yourself, you will never arrive, because the self that is craving is the same self that will find the next thing to crave the moment it gets there. The Dhammapada, one of the oldest and most widely read collections of Buddhist teachings, puts it this way: from craving springs grief, from craving springs fear. For one who is wholly free from craving, there is no grief, whence then fear. Not freedom from desire entirely, freedom from the compulsive unconscious craving that makes your peace conditional on the external world cooperating. The Buddhist answer was not to stop working or stop caring. It was sati, mindfulness, presence, the radical act of being fully here in this moment, without making your well-being contingent on what hasn't happened yet. Here is what's remarkable. Two traditions, two continents, separated by thousands of miles and developing largely independently of each other. They are not the same system, and it would be wrong to flatten them into one. But when you put their diagnoses side by side, the convergence is striking. The Stoics and Buddhists were not saying ambition is wrong. They were saying ambition becomes painful when it secretly carries the job of making you whole. You have been placing your sense of wholeness outside yourself, in results, recognition, outcomes, achievements, and because those things are always temporary, always contingent, always slightly out of reach, or already fading, the feeling of fullness they produce is always temporary too. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in his journal, that very little is needed for a good life, and what is needed is found within, not without. The Buddhist teaching on the cessation of suffering points in the same direction, not to get the world exactly right, but to abandon, release, and let go of the craving that makes your peace conditional on the world cooperating. 2,500 years of independent thinking arriving at the same door. This is not a call to stop working hard. Neither the Stoics nor the Buddhists were anti-effort. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire. The Buddha taught for decades without stopping. Seneca wrote volumes. Epictetus built a school. The shift they are pointing to is subtler than effort versus rest. It's about where you locate your sense of completeness. Ask yourself this question, and sit with it honestly. Am I working towards something because I genuinely find meaning in the effort? Or am I working because I believe that when I arrive, I will finally feel okay? If it's the second one, you are not alone. Almost everyone is doing the second one. But both traditions point clearly in the same direction. That version of work will never deliver what you're actually hungry for. The Stoic practice is to ask, before any action, is this within my control? Give the work everything you have. Release the outcome with open hands. The Buddhist practice is to notice, in real time, when the mind grasps, when it says, once I get X, then I can rest, and to gently return to the present moment, where the only actual life is happening. Neither of these is easy. That's why both traditions built entire systems of practice around them. Not because the insight is complicated, but because the habit of grasping runs very, very deep. But here is the freedom that both traditions are pointing toward. You don't have to wait to arrive somewhere to feel whole. The wholeness was never at the destination. It was always available right here, in the quality of how you show up, right now. That's not a comfort phrase. It is the hardest and most practical thing either tradition ever taught. The ancient philosophers weren't guessing about this. They had watched enough human lives, including their own, to know that the ones who worked hardest and felt emptiest were usually the ones who had placed their center in the wrong thing. They weren't telling you to care less. They were telling you to locate yourself differently. And once you do, the work doesn't stop. But the ache underneath it can. Which landed harder for you? The Stoic answer or the Buddhist one? Let me know in the comments. If this shifted something, like this video, subscribe to Still Mind, Loud World, and share it with someone who is exhausted from achieving and still not feeling it. Hit the bell. There's more to come.